Ancient civilizations from long before the Christian era were keenly aware of the natural rhythms of the world around them. Through careful observation of the sun, the moon, and the changing seasons, they were able to divide time into days, months, and years. This process of timekeeping became foundational to how ancient societies organized their lives, especially as it related to agriculture, religious practices, and governance. Long before scientific instruments were invented, humans relied on the natural world as their clock, and these observations formed the basis of the earliest known calendars. The first calendars, particularly those used by early civilizations, were based largely on the lunar cycle, the phases of the moon, which lasts about 29.5 days. A year, according to this system, was calculated to be approximately 354 days, which led to a misalignment with the solar year, the actual length of time it takes for Earth to orbit the Sun, 365.25 days. Over time, this difference of roughly 11 days each year created a significant problem for ancient societies that depended on the precise timing of seasonal changes. If the lunar calendar was used without adjustment, agricultural cycles could become out of sync, and festivals or religious observances would not fall at the correct times of year. In ancient Egypt, where agriculture was at the heart of society, this misalignment posed a real risk to their survival. The Egyptians depended on the annual flooding of the Nile River, which provided the rich silt necessary to fertilize their crops. This flood, which occurred every year around the same time, was not only an agricultural event, but was also seen as a divine occurrence. The flooding brought fertile soil to the otherwise dry and arid land along the Nile, making it one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world. While the ancient Egyptians couldn't yet determine the precise number of days in a year, they keenly observed the annual flooding of the Nile and used it as a marker to organize their agricultural calendar. The flooding usually occurred at the same time every year, and thus they learned to plant crops in the months leading up to the flood and to harvest them before the waters began to recede. However, despite these observant practices, the challenge remained that the lunar year of 354 days didn't align perfectly with the solar year of 365 days. To solve this, the Egyptians began using a solar-based calendar. They continued to use the lunar cycle for some religious purposes, but for agricultural and civil activities, they adjusted their system. The first step was to shift from a purely lunar year to a year that was based on the sun's movement. Early Egyptians adopted a solar year of 365 days, but they did so by simplifying the calendar into 12 months of 30 days each, for a total of 360 days. This left a gap of 5 extra days at the end of the year, which were added to ensure the calendar stayed roughly in sync with the solar cycle. These additional 5 days were seen as special and were often reserved for celebrations and religious festivals. In this way, the Egyptians created a solar calendar that could be used for practical purposes, including agriculture, but also served to organize religious observances. Though the 365-day year wasn't perfectly aligned with the actual solar year, since the solar year is approximately 365.25 days, the Egyptians had developed a system that was much more accurate than the lunar calendar, which was especially important for a society whose economy depended heavily on predictable seasonal events like the Nile flood. The solar year was closely tied to celestial events. The ancient Egyptians, like many early cultures, paid attention to the stars for guidance. One of the most crucial stars for the Egyptians was Sirius, known in ancient Egypt as the dog star. Sirius was linked to the annual flooding of the Nile and its heliacal rising, when the star first became visible in the morning sky just before sunrise, marked the beginning of the flood season. This event was used as a key indicator of when to start planting crops. It also served as a means of synchronizing the solar calendar with the cycles of the natural world. The Egyptians used this astronomical knowledge to further refine their calendar. By observing the rising of Sirius, they were able to calibrate their calendar to the true solar year. This helped them establish a highly organized agricultural system. When Sirius appeared in the sky, they knew it was time to begin the cycle of planting. By connecting celestial events to the rhythms of nature, they ensured their crops would be planted at the optimal time, maximizing agricultural productivity. Though the Egyptians created one of the first known solar calendars, their system was still not without imperfections. The solar calendar they used still didn't account for the fraction of a day that made up the 365.25-day solar year. This meant that over time, the calendar would drift slightly out of sync with the solar year. However, the Egyptian solar calendar was a major breakthrough, and it laid the foundation for future refinements. Over the centuries, as different civilizations adopted and adapted these early timekeeping systems, further improvements were made. In particular, the introduction of the leap year by the Romans was a major milestone. The leap year was introduced to correct the error that came from the solar year being slightly more than 365 days. By adding an extra day to the calendar every 4 years, the Romans were able to bring the calendar closer into alignment with the solar year. This correction, known as the Julian calendar, remained in use for over 1,500 years. The Julian calendar, however, was still not perfect. While the leap year system helped correct the discrepancy, it still overestimated the length of the solar year by about 11 minutes. Over centuries, this small difference added up, causing the calendar to gradually shift out of sync with the seasons. This was the reason for the eventual introduction of the Gregorian calendar in 1582, which made further refinements to the leap year system, improving the accuracy of the calendar even more. The Gregorian calendar is the system we use today, and it is the result of centuries of refinement and adaptation. The transition from the ancient Egyptian lunar calendar to the solar calendar and the subsequent developments of the Julian and Gregorian systems reflects humanity's ongoing attempt to understand and measure the passage of time with greater precision. The journey from simple lunar observations to sophisticated solar timekeeping systems was not just a matter of practical necessity. It also reflected the deep relationship between early societies and the natural world. In the ancient world, timekeeping was more than a tool for agriculture. It was a vital part of religious and cultural identity. The Egyptians, in particular, saw time as a divine force, closely tied to the movements of the heavens. Their efforts to align the human calendar with the cosmos were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the world, life, and the divine. By developing a system to measure time based on the natural cycles of the earth and the heavens, ancient people laid the groundwork for the timekeeping systems that still govern our lives today. The ability to predict the changing seasons, to understand the relationship between the stars and the earth, and to organize the year around these patterns was crucial to the survival and flourishing of ancient civilizations. It is through these early innovations that we continue to mark the passage of time in the modern world. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this exploration into the origins of timekeeping. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on future discoveries. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Knowledge Discovery, where curiosity leads to understanding.